so much of the ways in which we read the text of Genesis, the text of the Bible, is through this very Western, Eurocentric, Christian, post-Christian lens. So when we read something like Genesis chapter 2 to 3, we think about the fall of man. We think about the entrance of sin into the world. And right away, I want to challenge your thinking, David. I want to challenge everyone's thinking with regards to this story. Just forget everything that you think you know about this story, because I'm going to introduce some stuff to you today that is going to be new, I think, for a lot of people. Um, just to give you an idea where this comes from, Paul wrote to in the epistle to the Romans in chapter 5 verses 12 to 14, or verses 12 and 14, just as through one man sin came into the world, so also through sin death, and so death has passed onto all because everyone has sinned. Death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sins were not the same transgression of Adam. So Paul has clearly shifted the focus of this story onto this idea of sin, of Adam's sin, and how that's affected humankind. And when you open up your Bibles, quite often this is how it's presented. When you hear preachers preach about Genesis 2 and 3, this is what they talk about. This lecture on Genesis 2 and 3 follows on my full lecture on Genesis chapter 1. So some of the stuff there is kind of assumed in this lecture. But one of the clear points I want to get across right away is that within the Bible, there is not just one story of creation. There are several. There's at least two stories of creation, and then there's several echoes. There are other texts in the Bible of other stories of creation. You can see this in places like Psalm 74 or Proverbs 8 or Isaiah 14. Like, these all contain echoes of other creation stories. So as we're reading Genesis 2 and 3, I want you to think about this as an independent story of creation. And like any good story, you have to sort out what's going on, what it's about. And because this is a creation myth, I'm going to ask you, David, and the viewers, to set your sights on a couple of important questions. When you look at just this second creation story, without presuming the first story, you're going to see differences, right? First of all, you're going to notice that God behaves differently in this story than he does in the first story. And right away, that's one of the questions, right? What sort of God is this who's creating in Genesis 2 and 3? And how does that contrast with the God of Genesis 1? He's got a different name. There's different aspects of his character and his work in terms of creation from Genesis 1. And then, really importantly, what sort of world is he creating? Because as I mentioned, a young earth creationist, or someone who assumes that the Bible is univocal, will want to focus in on this story as an expansion of what's happening in Genesis chapter 1. So they will make assumptions about things that aren't there in the text, right? But importantly, as much as what's already in the story, we also need to pay attention to what's not there as a means to understand exactly what's going on. I did notice, I just wanted to cover this. Somebody in the chat did ask the question about which of the two stories is older. I think most scholars are almost are in wide agreement about this, that this story is older than Genesis chapter 1. And in many respects, Genesis chapter 1 is trying to recontextualize what this story in a different sort of framework and is actually providing an apologetic based on problems that they perceive
Yeah.
from this story too, right? We're going to start by reading the story, and we're going to read it from my favorite version of the Bible,
the big the big part.
the Brick Bible. Yeah. So should we maybe bring the screen up and
Yeah.
just go through the story? And when I teach this course, this is kind of how I do it. Right away, we're gonna read the story, and the Brick Bible's version is great because it's visual, and because Brandon Powell Smith, or Elba Sperling, as they refer to themselves now, the author, the creator of this masterpiece, has paid very close attention to what's going on in the text in an effort to recreate these environments. So let's just go ahead and read this. On the day Yahweh God made the earth and the heavens, no plant or shrub had yet sprung up, because Yahweh God had not caused it to rain, and there was no man to work the ground. And Yahweh God formed man, the Adam, from the dirt of the ground. And he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. It literally says he breathed into his nose. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, right.
And the man became a living being. So I'm going to pause here because something that is missing from this version of the story in Brandon Powell Smith's telling is a section of geography that I just want to draw some attention to. So I'm going to read verses 12 through 14 of Genesis 2 after Yahweh God has planted the garden in Eden. And it says here, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then the narrative takes a little break there to discuss sort of the wider geography. And I think it's useful to spend a little bit of time looking at this. Here's what the text says. A river flows out from Eden, giving drink to the garden. And from there it diverges and becomes 4 headwaters. The name of the first is Pishon. It encircles the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. There is also Bedolah, or amber, which is a type of precious metal or a stone, and the stone of Soham, or redstone. The name of the second river is Gihon. It encircles the entire land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris. It goes eastward from Ashur. The name of the fourth is Euphrates. So, and I'm just going to switch here, and I'm going to read from the chapter that I've written on this to point something out. So, while one of the things that we note in distinguishing this story from Genesis chapter 1 is that there's not such a strong focus on what I call cosmic geography and the shape and the appearance, the broad shape and appearance of this place. There is a small exception here. The world is both nourished by water and surrounded by it. The waters and earth are similarly distinguished, but in this world there is no sea. You'll notice it's only rivers, right? Just rivers and land. The picture here is of a great river originating in this place in Eden and flowing through the garden by plants, and from there branching into 4 tributaries, all of which are named. Significantly, all 4 of the rivers are also geographically identified with locations. And there's been much energy expended and much written about the specific locations of these places. And we know clearly of 2 of them. And you've probably heard of these 2 rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Tigris is a massive and important river flowing southeast from modern Turkey, and then into the Euphrates River before emptying into the Persian Gulf. It was an important river in the mythology and religion for both the Hittites and the Sumerians. The river is said to flow east from Ashur, which was the ancient capital of Assyria. It remained a consequential sacred center for the Neo-Assyrian emperors in the Mid-Iron Age. So these were the people who were ruling in Assyria, like during the 8th, 7th centuries BCE, right at the time of the early stages of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. The story does not locate the Euphrates River, but this river was widely known throughout the ancient world, and the name of it was always interchangeable with the city and the region of I almost said Babylon, Babylon, which was the splendid capital of the great empire of the same name, perched on the shores of the river. But the other two rivers are unknown. Some commenters suggest that their names are more descriptive than locative. And what I mean by that is they describe what rivers were doing. For instance, Pishon is from a verb meaning to leap, and Gihon is literally the springer out. So it's kind of describing the activity of the water. There are various ideas about the identification of these two rivers, and in no small part because of their description surrounding entire regions. You'll notice that when I read it, it said that these rivers literally just encircle the entire land of Cush, or the entire land of Havilah, where there's gold, right? Um, and this is something that rivers don't do. So what's going on here? Um, the land of Cush is commonly identified with Ethiopia, or Nubia, which is in like ancient geographical terms. Egypt is basically the Nile Delta and south, and Nubia is just further south from that along the Nile River, and that's kind of what's considered the land of Cush. Um, and this could be in view here as a description of the division between of all the great empires at creation. So in this reading, Cush could be just East Africa. However, some have suggested that this could otherwise be with reference to a group of people known as the Kassites, who were living in the Zagros Mountains in modern Iran, and they ruled the city of Babylon for about 400 years, from the 16th to the 12th centuries BCE. But the important point here is to note that we don't know where these rivers are or what they're doing. But I tend to think that this is descriptive of the entire world as it was understood by the readers of this story, that it was a world that was basically defined by these great rivers.
This is super interesting because to me, this is a very telling problem that I find with the Bible, if taken as the literal perfect word of God, like it's like if taken as true. And I shared this with you yesterday. There's a little side project I've been working on that may or may not come out, but it's a book on deconstruction. And these are just my notes. But this is an image I put together based on images that I saw online. But does the biblical God play favorites? Does he bestow special privilege upon particular groups, regions, or era? According to the narratives of the Bible, it might seem so. Each divine intervention, every exile, the conquering of each city, every miraculous recovery, each resurrection from the afterlife, every brutal prosecution, and every sudden conversion all took place within a distinct inked circle on the world map. So, like I mean, maybe is the world map that you're describing, would it
Yeah,
be bigger than this little circle here?
no, maybe a little
Okay.
bit. It would probably stretch as far east as the Persian Gulf there, which is
Oh
where
yeah. So just in
Mesopotamia is, right? So, but
yeah.
it's not very big. If you look at it this way, and if you think about the extent of this world as people understand it,
Mm,
you could get the sense of how they thought they were
yeah.
surrounded by rivers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They knew that, for the Red Sea, for example, they knew was bounded on two sides by land, by the Arabian Peninsula on the one side and by Egypt on the other side. So in their imagination, maybe this was just a gigantic
A giant river.
river.
Yeah.
Similar with the Persian Gulf is the emptying point of, these other two great rivers. So I just make this point to kind of say, it's not as silly as you think it is.
Mm.
If you're limited in these sorts of ways, through the geography and also through our ideas of what a river is compared to an ocean or a lake or a sea,
Mm.
right? These ideas could be more fluid in this ancient mindset.